Man follows wife with drone, realizes why she wears makeup all the time. His pulse was racing as she used his drone to catch up to his wife. It had been 18 happy years, but he didn't think he'd have to resort to this to find out what was going on. And when he saw it he wondered how she could do something like this to him. As he kept watching the screen he felt his blood start to boil. Is this what she had been doing behind his back? He watched as she let her hair loose, he couldn't believe it. John had a beautiful wife named Donna and a modest house in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. They tied the knot 18 years ago and stood by each other through everything. John never once questioned how he felt towards Donna. In their long marriage, he was still just as in love with her as when they got engaged. But when he caught her doing something questionable he started rethinking everything. The couple started a beautiful family together, they always heard the laughter of their 2 kids in the halls. They felt so blessed to have kids like theirs. To everyone in the neighborhood, they seemed like they were made for each other, no one could refute that. They were also blessed to have such kind and clever children. John and Donna loved each other despite having the odd spat, but all couples had those, right? At the end of the day, they were both on the same side and knew where each other stood. Or so John thought at least. John would soon find that there was much more to his wife than she was letting on. And he would feel the consequences. Recently Donna had been acting quite differently, John couldn't quite put his finger on it though. While John had a more relaxed job working from home, his wife worked at a pharmacy. He knew when her shift was over because she normally would leave at a certain time and get back at a certain time. But recently, this wasn't the case and he'd have to figure out why. When they tied the knot Donna stopped wearing makeup altogether. But recently, she had started bringing makeup home from the pharmacy and wearing it when she left for work. She was also wearing skirts and blouses when she didn't before. The biggest thing though was that she was getting home at an increasingly late hour. John needed to know what was going on, he was her husband after all. But when he politely asked her what was going on she would give him very vague and cold replies. He tried to shake it off, but found it bothered him way more than he initially thought. If she wouldn't tell him, he would have to devise some way of finding out on his own. But he needed a plan. He knew that if he asked a second time it would end in an argument. John worked from home as a photographer. This meant that he had a lot of camera equipment including a drone. He thought about it for a while and decided that he would use it to follow her. He would follow her on her way to work one morning by flying the drone close by. But he had no idea what he would discover about his wife and how it would turn his world upside down. He didn't want to waste time so he decided to do it the next morning. He was feeling guilty, but there was no other way to find out what she was doing. He had to find out the cold hard truth at any cost. He kissed Donna as she walked out of the door that morning. As soon as she was gone he ran to his bedroom where he turned on the drone. He went outside and prepared to fly his drone after Donna. At first, everything seemed normal. He watched her walk towards the pharmacy, but then she suddenly took a turn in another direction. John felt his anxiety creeping in. Why isn't his wife going to work? What is she doing? John's heart was racing as he followed Donna with his drone. She made her way towards an unfamiliar location. Somewhere he had never been before. Finally, Donna arrived at a parking lot where a car was already waiting for her. John couldn't believe what he was seeing, but this was only the beginning. In the meantime, his wife approached the strange car, untied her hair, and brushed through it with her fingers. She seemed calm and relaxed. John could hear his heart pounding in his chest. He could hardly control himself. He didn't know his wife as well as he thought. She was clearly hiding something from him. He froze as he watched her walk towards the driver's seat window and kiss the person sitting inside on the cheek. Then, she opened the passenger's door and got in. John couldn't stand watching it any longer. He brought the drone back to the house and shut the door behind him. He felt the tears running down his face. How could she do it to him and their children? John decided to confront her about what he saw as soon as she got home. He waited for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he heard Donna walking towards the front door. Suddenly, he found himself unable to say a word. He just stood there in front of his wife with tears in his eyes. Eventually, he managed to pull himself together and told her everything. Donna explained she was helping out at another location in another town. She wanted to make a good impression on the manager and staff at the other pharmacy. That's why she wore makeup and bought new clothes. The car John saw her getting into belonged to her friend and co-worker, Marissa. Every day, Marissa picked her up from the parking lot and they drove together to work. Donna had told her husband about it many times before, but he always forgot. So when he asked her about it for the 10th time, her patience ran out and she replied to him vaguely. After all, how many times do you have to explain the same thing over and over again? Donna was annoyed at her husband. She felt like he wasn't listening to her in the slightest, causing her to distance herself from him to avoid a fight. John felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. His wife wasn't cheating on him. Then, he remembered that she was telling him about it before. Donna was in disbelief when she learned her husband was spying on her. How could he not trust her? She asked him to promise to never do it again and listen to her better. John felt very guilty about it. This was all his fault. If only he paid better attention to what his wife was telling him. Would he be able to fix it? John's actions hurt Donna's feelings. After all, none of this was her fault, as she told him several times before that she was helping out at another pharmacy. Instead of listening to her and maybe offering her a ride to work, John went behind her back and spied on her with his drone. How could he be so immature? After talking it out with John, Donna forgave him and their bond got even stronger after that. They love each other too much to let anything get in the way of their marriage. Everyone makes mistakes. Some people learn from them and others don't. John started paying close attention to everything happening around him.